So thank you for coming to this one, though. I think we've got a great presentation today. So real quickly, just want to introduce my counterparts up here today. We've got Mark Pettinger, who's the Recreational Marijuana Program spokesperson for the Oregon Liquor License Commission. Thanks for being here, Mark. We also have Sam Cole, a Traffic Safety Communications Manager for CDOT. And we have Ali Maffey, Policy and Communications Supervisor for the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. So Sam and Ali are going to talk about a couple of campaigns that the state of Colorado has run about marijuana education and awareness, both phenomenal campaigns. I'm really excited for you all to see that if you haven't seen it yet. And Mark is going to talk about some great work that the state of Oregon is doing in terms of reaching out to stakeholders and constituents. So I'm going to kick things off here. Again, my name is Dan Rowland, and I'm the communications advisor for the city of Denver. So I primarily work on communications issues around our business licensing operation and our marijuana policy office. And as you can imagine, over the last couple of years, that's been quite an undertaking, and we have a ton of interest in what we do, both from the media, but also from our residents, our sort of local stakeholders, and obviously serving in this role, bringing folks together to talk about best practices and answering the questions that we get from outside of our city. So essentially what I tell people is that everyone has an interest in this. And as a communications director, it can be viewed in a couple of ways. It can be a nightmare, or you can have the most successful story pitches you've ever experienced as someone who deals with the media and tries to get ideas out there to the public using the media. I've never, in my career of working with media and advertising, had as much success getting stories placed as I have with marijuana, because there's just such an interest in it. Now, it can be a bit of a burden, and I guess when I'm asked for ways in which to structure communications for a marijuana policy office or a licensing department, I basically say hire someone and then hire another one just like them. But that's not always possible, so we do the best we can. And at the end of the day, I think it's what we do as communicators is think about to whom we are accountable, right? And this list is by no means comprehensive, but just a sort of sampling of all the people literally in one day that I might hear from, asking for information about what we're doing, how it's going, how we're measuring it, things like that. So I think the internal piece is good to remember that you've got your elected officials, your department heads, those internal stakeholders that you're used to working with, but you should surround yourself with a trusted team of advisors that you can bounce ideas off of, vet the information through. More often than not, you're getting asked a data question about number of arrests or amount of tax revenue, how it's being spent, things of that nature, where you really need to run that through the proper channels in your organization to understand exactly where that money is going, how the laws are being enforced, and without a trusted group that you can go to on a moment's notice, you're going to be flailing in the wind a little bit with your response to the public on that. And then obviously media is a big piece of what we do and who we're accountable to. Again, just a little smattering here, a collage. These are news organizations that I have heard from in the last 4 weeks. So obviously some local, some non-local, some national, some international. Just a reminder that everyone is watching and really curious about what the experience with marijuana and managing it is like. And we're 3 years into this now. And this list is just as robust as it was at the very beginning. So whether or not that'll be sustained, I'm not sure, but certainly the interest has not waned since we started doing this. Just some advice for communicators out there. Remember who you're talking to, and a reminder to tell your story. And I guess what I mean by that is that everyone else is going to try to tell your story for you about what marijuana means to your community, what is going on in your community as it relates to marijuana management. And it is incumbent upon the regulators, the people that are implementing this, to make sure that our perspective is told as well. Karen passed out some copies of our annual report. Thank you, Karen, for doing that. This is one tool that we have to do that. And at first, I wasn't quite sure, frankly, why we needed an annual report. And this is our second edition. And I wasn't quite sure why we were going to do this. But really, what I came to understand is that it's a way to document the work that we do. And it is an incredible fallback tool for information. I have gotten very good at just responding to emails by saying, check out this link to our annual report. All the information you just asked for is in there. So it's a wonderful way to create some baselines and, frankly, for us to look back and see how things are trending in terms of crime data, in terms of revenue, how we're implementing, and things of that nature. So the next piece I would say is when you're documenting all this great data, there's a lot more to the story than that. And depending on the questions you're trying to answer and the points you're trying to make, or perhaps the laws you're trying to pass through your city council or state legislature or whoever, you need to document the issues, and you need those visuals to tell the story. And this is one of my favorite slides from a city council presentation that we put together a couple years ago when we were attempting to pass an ordinance to limit non-licensed grows in Denver to 36 plants. And the reason why we felt that was necessary is that we were seeing these unlicensed grows ballooning up to 2,000 plants. They were a hive for criminal activity. These photos were not meant to be sensational by any means or scare anyone. They were just, frankly, one or two photos of a collection of hundreds that our inspectors were seeing in some of these facilities, and really helped us tell that story of why we needed to take this action. The 36 plant count ordinance was passed, and that's given our law enforcement now a bright line which they can use when they're inspecting these types of facilities. The last piece I want to cover really briefly is about communication and outreach to the industry. Obviously, this is new for all of us. It was certainly new to me taking this job 2 years ago, and we have this fledgling industry. And there has been no greater challenge and no greater satisfaction in my personal experience than dealing with the industry and getting to know the players involved and the people that we need to be using as our touch points to get information out to. What we've done is made a big commitment to just basically have an open door policy and answer the phone when they call. But beyond that, we've created a series of quarterly check-in meetings where we have a group of 20 to 30 industry folks come into the city and have these conversations about basically what's emerging, what's on their minds, what are they concerned about, what sort of technology advancements they're working on so that we can sort of be in the loop from a regulatory side about things that we're going to have to perhaps take a look at in the future. They've been incredibly valuable. And I think just putting faces to names, honestly, has been really helpful. We created a industry bulletin. Now, these are not like a newsletter that goes out on a scheduled basis or anything like that, but basically a way for us to communicate with the industry about regulatory changes, when there's product recalls due to pesticides, when there are surveys that we want to do to get feedback from the industry. Really helpful when we are running something through city council and we want them to be aware and responsive to it, to give us feedback into the process, things of that nature. So again, just a smattering here of some of the bulletins we've put out this year. And sorry, I love the LOL cats. I can't help myself. But through this process, we learned that and I guess probably should have understood this to begin with, but there's a sort of inherent distrust, and there's a lot of barriers that need to be broken down between a government agency and the industry. And when we started working on pesticides over a year and a half ago now, we took some action to put a hold on plants in several grow facilities that were deemed to be a potential consumer health risk. Well, we did that because the information came to our attention. It was made very clear that there was a potential risk, so we took action. None of us ever thought about the fact that we were taking this action at the end of March. And what happens right after the end of March, the biggest holiday on the cannabis calendar, 420, it was seen as a move to try to shut down the 420, seen to take money out of the industry's pocket. That, of course, was not the intent there at all, but it was one of those things where it was just a reminder, oh yeah, they don't trust us, they think we're out to get them, we need to communicate better. So with that, we took a lot of steps to have a lot of industry outreach and meetings dedicated to the pesticides issue. And again, putting these folks together in a room could be extremely tense at the beginning, but you could literally watch the temperature come down throughout the course of the meeting and see people start to understand that some of what was being reported, some of what was being said and repeated, worst games of telephone ever, was simply not true. And these are all people on either side of the issue just trying to do their job. And we made a lot of progress there. And I think it was really an important lesson to remember to kind of stay out ahead of issues with the industry, keep your stakeholders informed, and keep moving to meet these folks face to face, because you get a lot more done that way. Finally, I talk a lot about telling your story, and it's good to remember that your story is still being written. Just throwing up some headlines and quotes here, and you can see that depending on who you talk to, you're going to get a different story every time. I saw another headline just this morning about Colorado, some measurement of a $2.4 billion economic impact on the state from the cannabis industry, right? So there'll be another article out in a week saying it's not that much. And my point is to stay above the fray and to really rely on your team and the data that you can compile and vetting those facts, those figures, those statistics, and getting good information out to your constituents, because they will absolutely be thirsty for that information. So thanks very much. I'm going to stop talking and kick it over to some much more interesting content. And with that, we'll go to Mark.
Thank you, Dan, and good afternoon, everyone. I think, the Colorado story and Washington has been going on for about 4 years. Our story is really only about 2 years old, and we're still, as far as recreational marijuana goes, we're still operating in a bifurcated system, in that the Oregon Health Authority still has some jurisdiction over recreational sales and will until the end of this year. And so we've kind of been a passenger in the car as we've developed the framework for the OLCC regulated and licensed system. And we'll come to an interesting close, I think, because even now, as we've started to license retailers, which we just started doing on October 1st, we're operating under two systems and two tax rates, and it has resulted in a fair amount of confusion. So as we've crafted the OLCC story, we've had to be really deliberate about how we distinguish and delineate between the Oregon Health Authority and our program, because they're still going to have oversight, at least for now, of Oregon's medical marijuana program. So with that, I want to kind of start off and go, there we go, or the clicker, I'll do that, okay. There we go, okay, thanks. So I think the best way to do this is to just talk about it chronologically. And before I joined the OLCC, back right before, it was about 2 years ago, that my colleagues there who are on the alcohol side had to get ready for this possibility. And so if you remember the famous presidential newspaper with, President Truman holding up, Dewey defeats Truman, they had to prepare essentially 2 editions. One, if ballot measure 91 passed, and another if it didn't. And leading up to that, they'd done some work, or the agency had done some work in order to secure a specific domain name, which was sort of the first of its kind in the country in terms of a government website. And you can see it's up there. So they worked to have that established and flicked the switch on that the day after the election, which is marijuana.oregon.gov. And that is sort of the depository for all the information that exists with our program. Right after the Truman defeats Dewey press release went out talking about how Measure 91 had been successful and kind of outlining what the next steps were going to be for the OLCC, we put out an online survey. And about 16,000 residents in Oregon rather, responded to that. And it was a wide-ranging survey to kind of gauge what concerns people might have, what they wanted to see in a regulated recreational system, what were the concerns of those on the medical side who were part of the medical program in terms of potential exclusion or issues that they might have. And all that was rolled up and used to formulate a number of community listening sessions, which took place in early 2015. And there were 11 of those around the state. And they were kind of like a town hall setting. And we had a facilitator who would kind of talk about or outline the various positions that had been developed through the survey, and then using a card system, green if you favor it, red if you're against, yellow if you're in the middle. Had the participants and those taking part in the meetings to use those cards to help us sort of develop a consensus and kind of give us a framework for mapping out further policy. Then we moved into rulemaking in the fall, and this I kind of get ahead of myself there a little bit, but we moved into rulemaking. We didn't have to do that for temporary rules. We could have gone ahead and just taken care of that on our own under the emergency clause, but we decided it would be a really good thing to involve all the stakeholders. And that included not only the industry folks and law enforcement and public safety, but also some of our compatriots in the city and county governments. And Victor Salinas from the city of Portland was a member of that Rules Advisory Committee. And then we had a number of subcommittees, I think it was 11 subcommittees. And the subcommittees and the full Rules Advisory Committee had more than 30 meetings over the course of about 7 or 8 months. And the net of that was getting everybody involved in that sausage-making process, if you will. Ended up, when it came time to pass the temporary rules last October, we'd set aside about 3.5 or 4 hours for the meeting, and had overflow rooms and everything set up to accommodate a huge crowd. Well, as it ended up, there were only half of the seats filled in our regular commission room, and the commission meeting went for about an hour and a half because everybody had participated in that process. They'd given their feedback. There'd been consensus, even if there hadn't been complete agreement among everybody. And so when we got to the end, there wasn't a lot of feedback that was negative or concerning. We just kind of moved ahead and rolled it out. And then another thing that we did the summer of 2015 was roll out a program called What's Legal Oregon, and I passed that out. You might see on the edge of the table there, it's a little handbill that represents. And I apologize, those were some of our last holdovers of that, but we did this campaign to address the public possession issues. Now, that really wasn't in our wheelhouse. We weren't responsible for it. We didn't have an obligation to do it, but no one else was stepping in to fill that void. So we came up with this campaign using a great agency out in Portland called the Metropolitan Group, and they developed that for us, and we developed a microsite, had all kinds of Q&As, some videos, posters that could be downloaded, and other information so people would know where they stood in terms of what was legal. And we did that heading into early start recreational sales, which started last October through the Oregon Health Authority medical marijuana dispensaries. So last December, we were getting sort of to the close of our temporary rules, and we had something to run with. And we were also in the process of developing an online application for our licensees to fill out, which was something different than what the OLCC had in place. On the alcohol side, we, believe it or not, still use a paper system, and so the best practices of the marijuana side are going to impact, going forward, going to impact the alcohol side. But we realized we needed to get out in front of people and kind of explain what this new process was going to be about, what the temporary rules were. And so we did a roadshow around the state. So we had our executive director, we had the chair of the commission for a while, and we had our policy analysts who were part of that. And we had about 4,000 people turn out. We did a couple sessions in Portland, one in Salem, Eugene, Medford, and I think Bend as well. And we had really good turnout, and a lot of people, frankly, were just kind of kicking the tires in terms of those who were attending, but had a lot of good questions. And one of the things that we did as well is that we sort of chose a sweet spot in the middle of the tour after we'd done it a few times, and we videotaped one of the sessions, and then we kind of edited it down and put that version on our website so that people could access it as well. And I'll show some numbers in a bit that show how successful that was. In the early part of the winter, in February, we also connected with Metric, which is our seed to sale, our cannabis tracking system provider, just as it is the state of Colorado's. And again, we did another roadshow with Metric, went around to 6 cities, and we actually went a little further, got over to the Oregon coast, where we knew there were going to be, and we were seeing some applications coming in from that area. And so we went there, excuse me, and did a workshop on the seed to sale tracking system. And that was good too, because at that point, these were folks, they didn't have to have a license, but these were folks who were really earnest about getting involved in the industry. And the workshop was sort of the first phase of the training that we were making available in conjunction with Metric. And this was a chance for them to kind of get an overview. They could bring as many folks from their organization to see it and kind of test drive it. And that was very successful too. And then this summer, I and 2 of my colleagues circled the state again and did a workshop on packaging and labeling. Now in our system, the OLCC has responsibility for the approval of packaging and labeling, but the authority to define what goes on the packaging goes to us. The authority for what should go on a label goes to the Oregon Health Authority. So essentially we're following what their requirements are, and we have a pre-approval process so that folks can submit their packaging and labeling, get it approved in advance before they're ready to go to market, so that when they actually have the product and they have the package, they don't then have to submit it to us for approval. They can just go. And so we circled the state, and these numbers were a lot smaller because there were, I want to say there were probably 500 to 600 people, because at this point then we're really with the people who are either licensees or they're in support services, either marketers or packaging companies, and so we're really getting down to the nitty-gritty. Now the real nice thing about doing all these road shows is that it also served as an opportunity to get a lot of good feedback from people. What was working, what wasn't working. We were realizing that we were becoming an unofficial market maker for a lot of people. In fact, I remember we were in Southern Oregon. I was having a discussion with a grower, one of our first licensees, and he said, "Well, Mark, who do I connect with, or how do I, go about finding people? And there was a dispensary owner from the coast who was planning to convert to an OLCC licensee, and so I just did an informal introduction of the two of them. And because there's really, unless you use the cannabis tracking system, it's been kind of difficult, because in this industry, particularly in the medical industry, the relationships that go back 5, 10, 15 years may not be the relationships that are going to exist going forward, because some of those folks aren't either going to be in the recreational or adult use system, or they're going to choose to bow out, and there's going to be consolidation, there's going to be a market shakeup. So the old historical handshake relationships aren't necessarily going to exist going forward. The other tool that we use that's been very successful is GovDelivery, which is a government platform, a listserv platform. And our list of subscribers has expanded from 3,000 before the passage of ballot measure 91 to now we have 29,000, and more than 19,000 of those are actually folks who've signed up strictly for marijuana information. We use that to send out press releases, to talk about the training sessions, industry bulletins sometimes, just a lot of information. And we have a pretty good open rate too. We have the rate varies anywhere from 25 to 45%. In terms of our content. On social media, we have our YouTube account has been useful for putting videos out. As I mentioned, if you were to go to our YouTube account, you would find several of the videos we've done. We've done one on packaging and labeling. We did one on the rules, and Metric is doing some as well. And those have gotten a lot of views because it's just a good, we found, a good way to direct people to get information they can see, as opposed to just a PowerPoint presentation if they can't get to a presentation. So that was a really good decision to include that kind of information. Okay. As far as stakeholder management, we've had really good interaction with our legislators, both formal and informal. We often meet with the chairs, the co-chairs of the Joint Committee on Marijuana Legalization to kind of run things by them. Again, the industry engagement through the Rules Advisory Committee has been helpful, because we can bring some of those folks in. Just like in Denver, they have the quarterly meetings. We can meet with those folks on a regular basis. We also have pretty good cooperation with our sister or partner agencies, the Oregon Health Authority, which is responsible for certifying labs and also for setting dosing standards and pesticide thresholds. The Oregon Department of Agriculture, which is in charge of pesticide issues, particularly with regard to application and investigation, weights and measures, and also inspecting for food safety, processors, and retailers. And then the Department of Revenue, which collects the taxes. Our agency only collects license fees. We have good communication between our various groups. I drive a group that's focused on the communications, and several of my colleagues are involved in policy discussion, ongoing working groups with those folks. And then the other thing that's been very important is just to have consistent engagement with the news media. I noticed when Dan put up the number of media that he's been working with most recently, one of the things that's been interesting for me, because I came from a corporate communications background, is that as opposed to necessarily, we have a beat reporter, for instance, with the Oregonian, similar to the Cannabist and the Denver Post. But aside from that, I have spent a lot of time working with the trade and the industry outlets, MJ Business Daily, Marijuana Venture, even some of the cultural magazines like Dope Magazine, because those folks are the ones who really reach people in this industry more so than the mainstream media that you would normally suspect or might normally work with. So it's been really important for me to work with those folks and take their calls and make sure they get things straight. In fact, last week Leafly printed something that attributed something incorrectly to our agency, which should have gone to Department of Revenue. I got on the phone with one of their editors. They corrected it pretty quickly. A couple of resources. We put together a business readiness guide. It's on our website, or that should be marijuana.oregon.gov, sorry about that. Modeled after a similar publication in the state of Washington. It's a living document, updated frequently. It has information on all kinds of, whether it's labor relations, whether it's working with the water master in your local area, whether it's getting credits from Energy Trust, which is our energy consortium in terms of consumer and industry, energy conservation, all sorts of information, because we found that folks in this industry may not come to it with a lot of background in business, and this is a good thing for them. What's legal? Oregon, as I mentioned, the handbill I provided to you, we launched. That website is still active. We're going to be updating it here soon. We also put together this sheet here that talks about which agency has responsibility for what aspect of this issue. It's downloadable on our site, and it is a good guide for agency folks, but it's also a good guide for consumers and the general public. And soon we're going to be updating our What's Legal with a new version, which is actually going to be focused. It's going to update the reflect recreational sales now in our stores, as well as focusing on, we're going to do another section that's going to be Go Legal, which is going to be a B2B focus in terms of the industry and trying to get them involved in the process. And then lastly, here's some numbers for you. So our website has gotten 3 million visitors. That business readiness guide, 30,000 downloads. Just a lot of activity, based on this information. On that website, we put a lot of information for the other. There are links to content from the other agencies, whether it's Department of Revenue, Agriculture, and Oregon Health Authority. So it's a really good spot for people to go to get good content. And then just on the below, those icons that are there. The Metropolitan Group, which did that campaign for us, also put those together, and we've begun using these in our communications to our licensees. It covers our 5 license categories, which are producer, processor, labs, wholesalers, research, and retailers. And then the last one on the right is for the marijuana worker permit. And so we've used those so that people who are flipping through stuff can quickly and very easily identify the content and the information that we're trying to provide for them. So, thank you.
Okay, so next up is Sam with CDOT.
So I brought up this bag of Cheetos, which we use in one of our campaigns. And I have to say, this position has really been a ball to work on. Rolling out this campaign, we've come up with some really creative ideas, and we're supported by leadership at CDOT that really encourages us to do things that are surprising, different, and edgy. And I won't get in trouble for doing it. So, so this is the drug driving campaign by CDOT, and I'm going to go through kind of its rollout. In the first year, we conducted several focus groups that informed our Drive High, Get a DUI campaign. And 4 of the things that we learned in the focus groups were, number one, they thought that people that in the focus group thought there were different penalties for alcohol versus marijuana, number 1. Number 2, they didn't know you could get a DUI for driving high. Number 3, they thought marijuana was safer than alcohol when it came to driving. And they also told us they don't want to feel criminalized when it comes to any sort of public campaign that we do. I'm going to grab my glasses over here at the table. That's fine. I'm more blind than I thought. So, in that first year, we had a very small budget, $120,000 that we got from the federal government to roll out 3 TV spots. And these TV spots actually are humorous and they're engaging, and people are like, well, it's such a serious issue. How can you kind of make light of it? Well, our goal is to capture the attention of marijuana users first and foremost and not judge them. We know that they're using, but we need to convey our message that they are putting us all in danger if they drive high. So we are at the very beginning stages of our behavioral change continuum where there's very little awareness about the dangers, both the dangers of driving high and the fact that you can get a DUI for driving high. So our number one message for the campaign became drive high can result in a DUI. And the second message was kind of a lighthearted message. You can do a lot of things while high. You can do your laundry, you can mow the lawn, you can bake a cake, but you cannot get in the car and drive. So off of that campaign, we then developed a couple TV spots, which I'll show you. And you probably have seen these. So that's one. Second one. Yeah, that's a look to die for. So definitely got a lot of attention, lighthearted. And the only problem with that one spot, we did get a little bit of negative feedback that it's stereotypical stoner thing with the guy there with the big hair. But it got literally millions and millions of views and earned media impressions. So we were happy with that. So at the end of the campaign, we literally launched this campaign within a few months of marijuana being recreational legalized in Colorado. And when we did our survey, 46% of people in the public said that they had seen our Drive High, Get a DUI logo or the tagline on that. And because this is really kind of the first transportation-themed public service announcements, probably almost in the history of the world, certainly the United States. We got global impressions, over 1 billion impressions for our work on this and those spots and the fact that we were doing this work. We also started to engage point of sale. We started working with dispensaries to get information to them. Actually, I've got some little postcards over here where they can at the point of purchase, they can tear one of these sheets off, put it in somebody's bag, and there's lots of information on there in the law and the dangers of driving high. I've got copies of these if you want one afterwards. So that was 2014, 2015, much more money because we got some money from the state marijuana tax funds. The goal of this campaign was to continue to run those TV spots and educate folks about the law, continue to use humor, but also introduce some ambient tactics, some guerrilla efforts that would give us some more earned media and do things that were surprising. Again, we were in market just 4 weeks, and after 4 weeks, and I credit this to these earned media tactics that we came up with. We had over 200 million earned media impressions. The media, as we heard, just loves doing stories about marijuana. They can't get enough of it. So, and again, we had good recall of the Drive High, Get a DUI tagline. The media mix was we ran those TV spots again. We also introduced them to the digitally on the internet through pre-roll. We also took a separate track with our Hispanic radio and billboards, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We learned to message very differently to the Latino community, and they respond much. They don't understand. The Latino community told us they didn't want spots that kind of were humorous. There's like something coming from the government. They want to, they want to know what the facts are, and they want us. They expect the government to deliver a serious message, not a humorous or satire-laden one. So. And we continued to do the point of sale with our arcade games, which I'll describe in a moment, as well as bringing our smoking car. So those arcade games, we literally had 10 arcade games made. They looked like racing car games, but when somebody stepped up to the to play. It said, CDOT reminds you playing video games while high is legal, driving is not. Pick a non-driving game. Just a very fun and playful way for people to get that message and reinforced for them. And the dispensaries that we worked with were very cooperative and putting them right there in the lobby. And lo and behold, every day there's hundreds of people that are seeing this message every day at dispensaries just because they're placed there. And the second one was our smoking marijuana car. This is a vehicle that we parked outside for 20 events or near concert venues and the like. The car just was parked there inconspicuously. Nothing was near the car. We weren't near the car, but remotely we pressed a button and the car would slowly fill with smoke. And the windows were slightly cracked, so the smoke starts to billow out. So it looks like people are getting high in there. And so as people and usually we did this in really crowded areas, and people are always kind of gathering around like, there's nobody in there. Why is it filling with smoke? And then as they're kind of looking at the car, big neon sign comes on the windows, drive high, get a DUI. And the reach at these events probably wasn't more maybe than a couple thousand people, but the earned media that we got on this was phenomenal. And I have a little description of both those.
On January 1st, 2014, Colorado became the first state to legalize the use of recreational marijuana. The 2014 drug driving campaign by the Colorado Department of Transportation was a smash hit, reaching more than 1 billion people worldwide after only 3 weeks in market. But the public still had more to learn. In 2015, CDOT focused on engaging today's savvy consumer on a more personal level. First up, the hotboxing car. CDOT parked this special sedan outside popular attractions such as sporting events and concerts. The car was rigged so that it fills up with smoke, stopping people in their tracks. The smoke then dissipates, revealing a message about driving while impaired that garnered plenty of attention.
It's an awesome way to cultivate awareness for that.
It's like driving drunk, you don't do it. Be smart with it.
While the car connected with the masses, CDOT also wanted to connect with individuals while they were in the process of purchasing marijuana. Dispensaries were the perfect venue. And knowing customers spent 15 minutes on average in the store, it was only natural to capture their attention with an entertainment vehicle they love, an arcade game. CDOT introduced a classic racing game we entitled Endgame, only it wasn't what you would expect. When customers started playing, a completely different message appeared.
Playing video games while driving high is legal, driving is not.
Customers were then rewarded with free classic non-racing games, such as Donkey Kong, Frogger, and Dig Dug.
If a lot of people knew that it was that illegal and that it was that big of a consequence, they might, think twice and not do it.
These games now sit in dispensaries statewide as permanent reminders of the Drive High, Get a DUI campaign. Word spread quickly about the game and smoking car as media outlets all over Colorado developed stories around them. News publications in cities all across the country also picked up the story. In the first 10 days leading up to 420, CDOT's campaign received more than 200 million impressions through invaluable editorial coverage. And we did with just 10 arcade games and 1 rigged sedan. In the end, CDOT created one-of-a-kind communications that engaged thousands of people, educating them about the laws surrounding driving while high on marijuana.
We just thought it was important to put a video together to push out on social media as well as provide to other states so other states can kind of learn from our experience. And we also, during 2015, went to the Cannabis Cup. And when I was at the Cannabis Cup at this event, we were handing out these Cheetos with little sticker on them. We handed out 15,000 of these bags of Cheetos with a sticker on them about the dangers of driving high. And we also had all these things that people can do in our tent, such as artwork, such as playing Jenga, such as munching on Cheetos. But lots of messages around the dangers of driving high in our tent. And then outside the event, we had the cannabis quiz cab bringing people home. And during that, while they were being transported home, if they got answers correct to some of our questions about the dangers of driving high, then they would be rewarded with some ride credits on Yellow Cab. So really successful way to engage people at a venue where they're like, what are you guys doing here? There's a lot of what we got. So 2016, this year. So the good news is that 91% of marijuana users know that you can get a DUI for driving high. That's great. Bad news is that a lot of them think that it's still safe to drive high, and a lot of them are still. 55% admit in our survey that they've driven a motor vehicle within 2 hours after consuming marijuana in the last 30 days. So we're like, well, let's move away from the humor thing and get a little bit more serious. Let's try to work towards behavior change, because we know, we also have some data in from Colorado State Patrol that in 2014, State Patrol was saying about 12% of their DUIs were for marijuana, and now it was getting close, beginning of this year, close to 18, 19%. And we don't know if that's because more people are driving high, or if it's because they've got more drug recognition experts and better trained officers to identify those. But whatever the reason, we know people are out there driving high. So we wanted to create a new campaign, entirely new campaign, to demonstrate the dangers of driving high instead of just the fact that you can get a DUI for driving high. So we named the campaign Dangerous Combinations. We had statewide reach on this campaign using online digital banners, internet pre-roll, as well as movie theater ads, and I'll show you some of the ads in a moment. We also had billboards that were geolocated near dispensaries, concert venues, and other places where our target audience, which I think you saw in an earlier slide, were males 21 to 34 years old, might frequent. And then we also had online banner ads. This is something I never knew you could do. If somebody was in a dispensary within the last 30 days, they could be served up with a pre-roll or an internet banner ad about the dangers of driving high later on their phone, which I thought was really cool. We did some outreach to the Hispanic audience with radio, billboards, and movie theater ads, and we had, of course, we love our PR stunts, so we did another one on those, and lots of media outreach. So these were two of the billboards that we came up with, obviously much more direct and to the point, very different from our previous campaign. Hits lead to hits, don't drive high. It's a mangled vehicle made to look like a marijuana joint. Grinding one can crash the other. There's a grinder there with a crashed car in it. Don't drive high. This one was very surprising because we put it, this is actually the side of the Marriott Hotel in downtown Denver on Champa Street, and this was a three-dimensional billboard of a marijuana joint smoking literally and lit up at night. Caught lots of attention because it was three-dimensional. It was smoking and it was lighting up, and people were coming by taking pictures. And again, it's the hits lead to hits message. And, I think there's 3 or 4 dispensaries within a mile of where this was located. What's that? Nope, it was taken down about a month ago. Yeah. So as far as reaching out to dispensaries, not only did we continue to provide them with that little tear-off sheet that they can give to some of their consumers, we also had this poster about the dangers of edibles. And it says, it takes up to 2 hours for an edible to affect you. Don't be behind the wheel when your high hits. If you're high, don't drive. And I just want to explain, this is one, we did this kind of in cooperation with the industry. Originally, we featured a lollipop, a very colorful lollipop, and they said they didn't like that, and they wanted us to do something, because, the children and lollipops and things they want us to pick a more of an adult edible. So we're thinking, well, we'll do a cookie or we'll do a chocolate bar. We ended up with a chocolate bar, so it was good feedback we got from them. So here's a couple of the ads that ran on the internet and in movie theaters.
Rolling one up now could mean rolling one over later. Driving high impairs your perception of speed, time, and distance. If you're high, don't drive. 19% of DUIs in Colorado are for marijuana. Why? Because marijuana impairs reaction time. Reaction time is important, as proven by the fact that you can't catch this skip ad button. Marijuana decreases your reaction time, making you an unsafe driver. If you're high, don't drive.
So which one of those two ads do you think people liked more, the first or the second? No, it was the first. I was surprised too. That rollover one performed actually nearly double the other video, and it might have something to do with the fact that somebody was rolling a joint, and I don't know, maybe that was interesting to folks. It had a highest completion rate of 77%. It had over 2 million video completions, so lots of people saw these ads in our target audience, of course. If you hadn't seen it, you're obviously not our target audience, so all is well. The click-through rate was very high compared to the industry average on those. So we were really happy with the way those turned out. Lots of views, lots of clicks. And what we're going to do next to kind of measure this campaign is we're going to be having a driver survey issued by CDOT in the next month, which will see if people are taking the dangers of driving high more seriously. We're going to ask them in the last 30 days, have you driven high, and see if the numbers are lower. And then just to also, because we love PR stunts, we rolled out the slow speed chase. We got 2 rental cars, we wrapped them, and made one look like a police car, the other one looked like a marijuana car, if there was such a thing. We had a big marijuana leaf on it. Both vehicles had some messaging around the dangers of driving high. And we took these vehicles and we drove them around the Snoop Dogg concert, around the 420 events, downtown Denver, and the media ate this up. They just ate it up. They loved it. Lots of internet stories, lots of TV, radio stories, and we're able to calculate the publicity value, well over $100,000 on each. And you can see some of the messages that we're able to put on the vehicles to communicate to the public, and through the news stories that we got. How am I doing? Fine with time? Okay. There's one more video. This is, I think, a minute or two. We're here to roll out the next iteration of our Drive High, Get a DUI campaign. We're going to take these vehicles, one which is wrapped in a marijuana leaf, and the other one which resembles a patrol vehicle. We're going to take these vehicles to the Snoop Dogg concert later on this afternoon at Fiddler's Green, and drive them around and get them to think twice about perhaps driving high.
For the most part, people don't take driving under the influence of marijuana as seriously as they do alcohol. And there's a fallacy that's been kind of put out there that marijuana is safer than alcohol, when in fact it is not.
You know, cops are out there and they're looking for it. And so the culture should be changing. They should be taking it just as seriously as driving under the influence of alcohol.
Marijuana is legal in Colorado. You can smoke in your private residence. I think if you're going to come out here, I think partake of that at your house. Get an Uber, get a cab, get a sober friend to drive you, have fun at the concert, and then when you get back, just to make sure you have a safe rest of the night.
Colorado State Patrol is taking the lead today for enforcement, spreading that safety message. Also helping to spread the safety message is Colorado Department of Transportation.
So again, a really kind of cost-effective way to reach a lot of people. I'll just end with a quick comment about our outreach to Latino community. Again, this is much more of a direct approach, much more of a serious approach. If you light this one up, don't start this one up. Don't drive high is what that basically says. And then we also worked with Trooper Alvarado at Colorado State Patrol, who recorded some radio spots for us on the dangers of driving high, and that driving high can lead to a DUI. So there's my contact information. If you want to, everything I showed you is basically just on our website, heatisoncolorado.com, and then just click on drugged driving. You're also welcome to email me. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. CDOT obviously has done some incredible work around this. The state of Colorado also has been responsible for overall messaging education campaigns out of the state's Department of Public Health and Environment. So we've got Allie to come and show us that great work.
Thanks, everyone. I love telling Sam that Spanish language campaign was up in my neighborhood quite a bit, and there's a tree covering the CDOT logo in the bottom right-hand corner. And I kept looking at it going, who is putting up these ads? I was so confused. Of course, it was our great partners. So as Dan said, I'm Allie Maffey. I work at the State Health Department. Many of you have probably seen a lot of our campaigns before. I didn't embed as many videos because I'm going to send you to our social media ads or social media sites to be able to see them as we go along. But I want to tell you a little bit about our work here in Colorado. So the State Health Department was tasked with monitoring data and trends as well as identifying the health impacts of marijuana. Daniel Vigil is in charge of that program at State Health Department, and I tell every other state, get yourself a Daniel. You need someone who's looking at your data and looking at the health impacts of marijuana. How many of you have Googled the health impacts of marijuana? Couple of you? Not as many as I would have thought. So when you Google it, you will find that it both will kill you and cures everything. And so as the State Health Department, if you're going to come out with messages about the health impacts of marijuana, you need some pretty solid ground to stand on of what the research is. And so our two programs work very closely together to be able to relay this information. So all of that is available in a detailed report that's available on our website, Monitoring Health Concerns Related to Marijuana in Colorado. And the 2016 version will be up in the next 3 months on that because they continuously monitor all of the health research. So it's a boring way to start talking about campaigns, but let me tell you, this is what you need most before you start messaging anything about the health concerns related to marijuana. And then we were tasked with also educating Colorado residents and visitors about safe, legal, and responsible use of marijuana. So these are our primary, this is what we stand on. And my counterparts have talked about working with the industry and working with a really diverse set of stakeholders, bringing a lot of people together at the table to be able to talk about this. And this is what we come back to every single time, safe, legal, and responsible use. We may differ slightly on what we believe is safe, what we believe is responsible, but every single stakeholder can get behind these statements and contribute to that conversation. So with our public health communication, really what became important is segmenting the audience, listening to their perspectives, testing the message, going where they are, and that's all part of formative research, and then keep listening and adapting as we go. So I'll show you some of the audiences that we've segmented. There's the general public. We're actually tasked with general public awareness in our state statute, and then reaching higher risk populations. And so you can see these here. That includes for us parents, retailers themselves, because a lot of our messages, you don't need to talk about safe storage to the general public. You need to talk about safe storage to people who are using. So making sure that we can reach users well. Our Hispanic and Latino populations, particularly those that are Spanish speaking, because they're much more limited access to information. Additionally, pregnant and breastfeeding women and youth, when we look at the impacts and the health effects and the research we can stand on, those were significant areas of concern for us. And at the center of all that, working with stakeholders and also the media for public relations. So looking at the timeline, this is the other challenge that I talk to other states quite a bit about. Is the timeline gets real tight when you don't have any money before you legalize, because the money comes through the tax revenue after you legalize. And so we didn't receive any funding until July 2014. Stores opened January 2014, let me remind you. So we didn't receive any money till 7 months later. And then if any of you have worked for a state or government office and you know what the contracting process is like, to then get money out the door to a marketing agency to be able to work with you on all of this, our incredible partners at Cactus, there's someone here, that's our marketing agency, turned around a campaign in 7 weeks from when we were under contract with them to when the campaign legislatively had to be in market on January 1st of 2015. So that was a really rough Christmas. So we initially launched the Good to Know campaign January 2015. Our TV spots didn't launch until about a month and a half later, just because of production timelines and getting in market. Then in July, we originally launched some trusted adult or parent and other adult campaign messages. And in August, we also launched our youth campaign, as well as our Marihuana en Colorado, Lo que debes entender campaign launched in August for our Spanish-speaking populations. We did a holiday push for the Spanish campaign, as well as for the Trusted Adult campaign. Then in June, we launched Tips for Tourists, as well as new aspects to our youth campaign, Protect What's Next, which include the Goal Getter, which I call Tinder for your goals, helping youth connect to things that are important to them. June, we also launched our pregnancy and breastfeeding campaign, and then most recently, the new universal symbol that we have. And I know each state, I believe, has a universal symbol at this point, and of course, we all adopted different universal symbols. They're not very universal, but it's all right, we're still educating about them. So here are our audiences. This slideshow, I think, what was it, 51 slides? Dan laughed at me when I gave him 51 slides, and I said, that's okay, I know you're putting them up on the website for everyone to see, and we'll just focus on the first couple campaigns, but you can all access this information afterwards. So my goal is not to get through all 51 slides with you, just so you know. So the Good to Know campaign, as we talked about, this was about promoting safe, legal, responsible use of marijuana through awareness and education of the laws in Colorado, and then to increase engagement and increase public awareness as we went along. Right after we legalized, even Seth Rogen, who was launching a movie here in Denver, posted this thing like, now marijuana is legal, come get high with me while we watch the movie. And it's like, nope, that's not legal. So as the first state to legalize, we had a lot of public education to do. And I loved what you said about government not being a trusted resource, because I say that all the time. Before we launched, we were not a trusted entity to provide information on marijuana. After 100 years of prohibition, government was not considered to be an authentic resource for this information. And so we did a lot of research, and what we found, the most important things were taking the middle ground, the balanced approach, highlighting the importance, the dangers of driving while impaired, promoting responsible youth, making sure we highlighted the impact on youth, and also talked about edible safety. So through a whole variety of tactics, we launched the Good to Know campaign, starting initially with radio and digital, adding in television, and a lot of research, and then point of sale later on. So the goodtoknowcolorado.com website now has expanded to include much more information on some of our subpopulations. As I said, good practice to segment your audiences appropriately. So we have information for different audience segments, but we also highlighted things like think about secondhand smoke before you toke, lock it up right out of reach and out of sight. Like an embarrassing photo, keep it hidden and locked away. Edibles take longer to peak, wait 4 hours after you eat. So how many of you have seen the Good to Know ads before? Very rhymey, approachable, cartoon-like. Again, backing up to government not being a trusted entity. We were not a trusted entity, and so an extremely approachable campaign was what a Cactus and we found through the research and testing a couple different creative options that it really had to be approachable and relatable to this audience to be able to build their trust. There's a little bit more information. These are out in the 400 block. You're able to access this information. So the Marijuana in Colorado brochures, there are a variety of them out in the 400 line over there on one of the tables. So feel free to pick some of these up. But this is some of the information that we recently launched as part of our tourism education. These are available. You can see the new universal symbol is on the back. And they're available at tourism offices and in Colorado tourism brochure stations, things like that. So what's really exciting to us, in the first 9 months of the campaign, we received 170 million impressions, which is essentially every adult in Colorado seeing an ad at least once a week for that entire 9-month period. And what we found were statistically significant increases in each of the 4 laws that were highlighted as part of the campaign. So the legal age of use, that you could get a DUI, that you shouldn't take it out of state, and that public use is banned. And each of those reached statistical significance. In addition to that, what we found is that those who remembered being exposed to the campaigns were 2.5 times as likely to know what those laws were and answer those questions correctly. So for us, this was really exciting, and that pre-post research, we actually have another point in time. We just got the data last week. We continued to see increases, but I don't have all of that ready to be able to share publicly yet, but we're excited to know that we saw increases yet again. Additionally, we saw increases in agreement with the health effects. So the statistical significant changes are there on the right in blue. But when we looked at the concerns around youth use, we saw a statistically significant increase in concerns about the health effects of youth use among adults. We also saw concerns about use around children, including secondhand smoke in the home and storing in open containers or around children. And then in high-risk use, we saw statistically significant increases in hash oil extractions, overconsumption of edibles, and the importance of waiting to drive after use. After this time, Colorado did make it illegal to use flammable solvents in hash oil extractions at home, but we did initially, that was more part of the campaign earlier on. However, use during pregnancy did not achieve statistical significance during that first time frame. But I'll take you back to the timeline. We just launched that campaign in June. And so this pre-post assessment of knowledge, this for us was great reinforcement of okay, we wouldn't have expected to see statistically significant changes there if we weren't highlighting those campaign messages at that time. So since then, am I doing on time? Okay. So since then, we have launched the Good to Know Pregnancy and Breastfeeding campaign. And in this campaign, we are highlighting educational information, what we found among women who are more likely to be marijuana users while pregnant or breastfeeding, which definitely is younger age group. We just got that data back from PRAMS. Was that they had doubts of whether or not THC could pass to a child and if it had any impact. And so really just starting with a reinforcing message, yes, there are some health concerns related to use, and yes, it does pass, so please have a conversation with your healthcare provider, encouraging that conversation on that end. They really placed marijuana about in the middle of all of the risks that we talk about during pregnancy or breastfeeding, which is about right for what the evidence shows. There are concerns about cognitive function and attention problems and IQ scores in youth that show up in adolescence, not any birth defects or immediate impacts of youth. And so there are some concerns. And looking at where women in our research, we had focus groups with a couple hundred women across the state. It was interesting to see where they placed it, what they were aware of, what they were not. So the research findings really that they wanted something thought-provoking, believable, credible, authoritative, and educational that would help deter use during that time. So for this campaign, as you know, pregnant and breastfeeding population is an ever-revolving population. So it's kind of nice. You don't have to refresh your campaign materials as often because you're new audience all the time. So it's very social media heavy, a lot of outreach, a lot of partnerships on like parent blogs and mommy blogs, pay-per-click and search. We have a great partnership with Baby Center. Found out that 70% of moms in Colorado are all on Baby Center, so that's a good way to reach a lot of moms. And then a lot of online display and digital advertising. So again, this is available on the website, and we have Of course, they're all sticking together. I'm sorry, everybody. There we go. Materials from the campaigns, handouts, as well as foldable cards that we've been partnering with our Nurse Family Partnership as well as WIC partners to be able to disseminate across the state. And this is just some of the campaign imagery and messaging. And then I know some people brought up, both in the last session that was in here regarding data as well as in this session about outreach. So We did also translate our fact sheets that are downloadable into 6 different languages for populations that might not be reached through our English and Spanish campaigns. Those are the 2 most dominant languages in the state, but we did make other information available. And then the last one I wanted to highlight, for now, I'm not going to go into the rest of the campaigns, but it's our Trusted Adult campaign. And as you all may know, youth do not react well to scare tactic messaging or anything they perceive as scare tactics. And what we found through our youth research for that campaign was that they weren't looking for health effects information through a campaign. That's what they called, I'm using their word, propaganda. And we were using the measured health effects research information that we have from our statistics and trends group. And so we were using really measured language, and they still called it propaganda. But then, as we probed deeper through the focus groups, we found that, but they still wanted to know that information. They just wanted to have a conversation about it, not see it in a campaign. And so the Trusted Adult campaign is really about helping equip those adults that youth trust. And I say it that way purposely because I may believe myself to be a trusted adult, but if no youth actually trusts me to have the conversation, I am therefore not the trusted adult in their life. So making sure that it's the adults that youth trust are equipped to have this conversation as it relates to marijuana. And quite honestly, it's not a different conversation than everything else. It's about talking to youth about their goals, what they're trying to achieve, and what can help them get where they're trying to go and what might get in their way. My husband was a 7th grade teacher for a long time, and that's the same conversation he had with them all the time, even about doing their homework, even about showing up and eating a bag of Skittles for breakfast in first period. It was always about what are you trying to be, who are you trying to be, where are you trying to go, and is this helping you get there or is it not? So it really folds into the same conversation, but there are unique aspects of marijuana that feel new to a lot of people, and maybe they don't feel equipped to have this conversation. So our campaign objectives were to engage those trusted adults with information they need to start the conversation and align it with the same campaign, the Protect What's Next that we were doing with youth, so that it's reinforcing the same message. This data was covered in the last presentation, so I won't highlight it in depth except for the bottom right-hand corner. Our Healthy Kids Colorado survey, which is essentially our YRBS in our state, found that if a student said, yes, my parent believes it is wrong for me to use underage, that student was 4 times less likely to have used marijuana. So kids are listening, but are parents having the conversation? So with this, what we found from parents is that they are concerned and they do want information. They do trust the other adults in their teens' lives. They trust their coaches and their teachers to have these conversations. And they really want resources. But their concern is that legalization equals normalization. It does. We legalized marijuana. It's now part of our state constitution in 2 different places. That people have a legal access to it in our state. So that does create some normalization. So what do you do to counter that it's not appropriate for underage use? So again, through a whole host of partnerships and social bloggers and pay-per-click and online display, pre-roll, et cetera, we launched the Trusted Adult campaign. And this one, I'm gonna be honest, makes me tear up a little bit. It's just pretty cool. It's called Amazing, is one of the ads. And so if you go to the goodtoknowcolorado.com website, or if you check out our Facebook page and just click on videos, that's gonna be your easiest way to access all of these videos. So they're pretty powerful. We do have handout materials and downloadable materials that accompany the campaign for adults to be able to use as well. So that's as far as I'm gonna go, just because of time, but all of this will be up on the website. The one last thing I will say, just to reinforce what Sam said about our Spanish-speaking population, is that different tone. So if you've seen the Good to Know Colorado campaign ad, for point of reference, our PSA in Spanish was a state trooper speaking straight to camera with no music behind it, just talking about what the laws were. So extremely different tones. Even the look and feel of the materials is very different. So I'll just reinforce that, but you can read more on the website or on the slides once they're uploaded.
All right, thanks, Allie. So we've got about 10 minutes, and we'd love to take some questions and have some discussion if anyone wants to step up to the mic.
Hello, thank you. That was really helpful. I'm from Seattle Public Health, on the Public Health Department in our county. We have been struggling a lot with reconciling our prevention partners that want to say marijuana is bad, let's not talk about it, don't talk to adult consumers, and wanting to do these public health messages. We'd love to adapt Good to Know, but our prevention partners say absolutely not, because you'll be promoting marijuana use. And so I'm just wondering, how did you guys, did you encounter that, and how did you help folks get to a point where you can talk to adult consumers about some harm reduction messages?
Great question. So I would say we both got there and we didn't. I think we've had, I get jealous of Sam's stuff every once in a while because his is a little bit more out there than I feel like we've been encouraged to be a bit more reserved because it's very clear that a driving high message, you're trying to reach users versus prevention message. I will still say, like, safe storage, we only need users to be the ones concerned about safe storage. It's not really a general population message. And so it has been a little bit hard, but I think I think we got to a place as a state relatively quickly that we've legalized. This is here, this is now part of our state constitution. And so until and I'll back up to that same you need a Daniel, until the research really supports you saying absolutely no use. The Surgeon General came out, I believe it's 2011 or 2012, and said every cigarette kills. There is enough research and information behind this to say that every cigarette kills. We don't have that research on marijuana. 25 states have legalized it for medical use. And so to put it in the context of what the research says, and to keep bringing it back to that, and then legal access, it's part of our state constitution that people have access.
Yeah, I would just say that there's no evidence in the world of cigarettes and the world of alcohol that talking about both those substances has led to more use. So it's all about just trying to get ahead of a problem before it becomes a problem.
Hi, am I there? Sorry, Stephen Fiala from the Oregon Public Health Division. This is for Allie. In that best practices of public health communications, the last one was continuing to listen to your audience and potentially adapting your materials. And I was wondering if you could speak to any kind of adaptation that you've had to do over time. And I'm particularly interested in any kind of adaptation for your youth-focused campaigns.
Well, that was the example I was going to use, so perfect. So for example, one of our youth ads, in our initial launch, we knew that LGBTQ youth use at about twice the rate of our average youth. And so there was one goal. It had a youth texting, a teenage boy texting someone named Alex about going out. And so it was very gender neutral names where it could be assumed in either direction who he was asking out. And then, that got good feedback. But then we later went and did more focus groups just with LGBTQ youth and like through Gay Straight Alliances, things like that at schools, and found that it wasn't obvious enough. In order to truly reach that audience, we had to do something a bit more obvious. And so we have this great ad that also makes me tear up just a little bit of two boys leaving for prom. So that's one example. Other examples, I think, would include the parent campaign and the messaging. Over time, we initially launched with that pre-roll and had a little bit limited research. It was just kind of more animated video, but then through an influx of dollars, which we greatly appreciated to be able to go mass broadcast and television, we were able to do a lot more research and actually take it to another level of the parent education and hit them a little bit more directly.
So this is not Victor from Portland, Oregon. So this is not a question. Actually, I just want to praise you for the work that you're doing around equity and inclusion. I feel like I sound like a broken record off talking, bringing these questions into the messaging, and it's amazing, Mark. I mean, Ellie, Steve, all the work that you're doing, and Dan. I mean, the fact that you're doing in language and culturally specific targeted messaging, especially with LGBT youth, identity-specific groups, is huge, 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 and it makes a difference, especially with the LGBT community knowing that suicide rate is much, much higher than with the straight counterparts. And when you talk about like the transgender community, it is even higher than that. So I'm glad that and happy to hear that you're doing messaging with the youth as well. Thank you.
I'll just add a really exciting thing with the marijuana tax cash dollars that we're also able to do is fund. Currently, we have 37, and we're adding additional communities across the state to implement communities that care. And so some of them are focusing specifically on different subpopulations and prevention in their local areas. So that's been a really exciting partnership with the messaging.
First of all, similar to what Victor said, just fantastic day, but really on point presentation, just really fantastic work. My name's Chris, and I'm from Redmond, Washington, but originally native Coloradoan, so I'm still go Broncos. So as much as everybody hates it in Seattle. But I'm the CEO of Medical Marijuana 411, and we're an online blog. We started with just telling the correct patient story. We've got 1.2 million Facebook followers, so a pretty big net. We approached Christy Weeks, Department of Health in Washington last year to do the online certification training. So we're one of 3 companies that is doing the medical consultant training. So my question is, where does kind of online training, online education fit into the next phase?
Well, at least in our space, we have, so on the alcohol side of our agency, training is done on, we actually sort of farm that out to the private sector in terms of the classes, alcohol server education classes. We decided that because we had to move really quickly, that we would do the marijuana education training in-house essentially, because the legislature expanded the scope of our marijuana worker permits, which is the equivalent of the alcohol server permit. They expanded it from just folks in retail to everybody in the whole industry. And so, as Ali already alluded to, when you've got a government contract and you have to put it in, not gonna work. So our initial pass, at least, is to have the training done in-house, and then we developed it in-house. But we have, for instance, the test itself was done by test.com. And in that area, we actually did do some multilingual activities. So the coursework itself, as well as the test, are both available in Spanish. The application, however, we weren't able to get that in Spanish. So that's the limit to what we've done so far. I would say, I've heard it a couple times, it's not just Victor that's popped up and said this. We acknowledge that not only do we have a worker community that we need to reach in multiple languages, but that we have a consumer and a community stakeholder audience that we need to reach too. It's on our radar, it's on our list, but the pace of things that we're doing right now, we just haven't gotten to it. And hopefully, when legislators see that we need to do it, these two have really shaken the money trees, pretty successfully, and so hopefully we can get some more dollars for that going forward.
Anyone else? I want to remind everybody we got a reception starting in just a few minutes right down the hall out here on the left. Some music and snacks and beverages. So thanks so much for coming, and we'll keep the conversation going.